Hello, and welcome to Accessibility in Illustrations. I am Iana. I'm a digital product designer from Brazil with a bachelor's degree in visual communication and a specialization in digital accessibility. Throughout my career, I have worked for big design agencies and tech companies where I have focused on creating digital products that prioritize accessibility, elegance, and user-friendliness. Today, I'm here to discuss an important topic, accessibility in illustrations. I will be sharing insights and practical techniques that can help you design illustrations that are inclusive and accessible to a wide range of users. By the end of this session, you will have a deeper understanding of how to create illustrations that break down barriers and have a positive impact on users of diverse backgrounds. So first of all, I'd like to talk a bit about accessibility. Accessibility refers to the practice of designing and developing products, services, environments, or digital content in a way that ensures equal access and usability for individuals with disabilities and promotes inclusivity for a diverse public. As designers, we hold a crucial responsibility to design accessible content that ensures equal access and usability for all users. It is our duty to ensure that everyone, regardless of their abilities, can access and benefit from the information we provide. Moreover, accessibility is not just a moral obligation, but a legal requirement in many countries. Legislation exists to protect the rights of individuals with disabilities and ensure equal access to goods, services, and information. Failure to comply with accessibility laws can result in legal consequences, including potential lawsuits and reputational damages for companies and organizations. By proactively incorporating accessibility principles into our design processes, we not only meet legal obligations, but also create more inclusive and user-friendly experiences. This approach benefits all users, not just those with disabilities. By enhancing usability, we improve user satisfaction and expand our audience reach. So when designing accessible content, we have a valuable framework at our disposal known as the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG for short. The WCAG provides a set of internationally recognized guidelines for creating inclusive digital experiences. The WCAG outlines various principles, success criteria, and techniques to make web content more accessible. It covers a range of aspects, including visual design, interaction, multimedia, and content structure. Not only does applying the WCAG principles enhance the usability and inclusivity of our designs, but it also helps us comply with legal requirements. Many countries have incorporated the WCAG into their accessibility laws and regulations. By adhering to those guidelines, we demonstrate our commitment to accessibility and minimize the risk of legal action. So by embracing the WCAG and integrating its principles into our design process, we empower ourselves to create visually accessible and impactful content. In this lecture, we are going to explore some of the WCAG guidelines that specifically relate to visual aspects and illustrations, deepening our understanding of how they can guide us in making our designs more inclusive for all users. In addition to exploring the WCAG guidelines, we will delve into invaluable insights regarding topics like text application in images and accessible typography. By understanding those fundamental principles, we can design illustrations that go beyond aesthetics and truly cater to diverse needs of individuals. Moreover, we'll discover best practices for integrating text within images in a manner that remains accessible to screen readers and other assistive technologies. So I'm just going to show very quickly the WCAG website. There we go. So this is a WCAG official website. And here on the left side, we have all of the success criteria they have in order to make content more accessible. So as we can see, there are many success criteria. It is a lot, and they are very technical. So I don't recommend trying to read this and understand all of this. For now, let's just focus on the ones that have to do with the visual aspects of our illustrations. So let's start by talking about contrast. Contrast is a crucial aspect of visual accessibility, particularly when it comes to color contrast. However, it is important to consider other forms of contrast as well, such as shapes, forms, and sizes. In illustration, the goal is to convey a story and ensure that it can be quickly and easily understood by the viewer. To achieve this, it's essential to ensure that the main subject of the illustration is easily distinguishable from the background and other elements. This can be achieved through the correct use of contrast. When it comes to color contrast, WCAG provides a clear guideline where it says that the background and foreground colors of text should have a contrast ratio of at least 4.5 to 1 for small text, which they consider to be below 13 points bold or below 17 points regular or thin or any other weights. So what this means is that when we are designing an illustration or anything else, we need to consider the contrast between the background and the text that we decided to use. And to do that, it's very easy. I'm just gonna go to my Figma over here. So what I did, I just color picked the colors from this Sobas poster. And now we have a square that has the exact same shade of orange and the black shade of black that is being used by the text. What I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna select both of these squares, and then I'm just gonna run this plugin that's called Stark. Stark is an accessibility plugin, and it has many options. Right now, we don't need to look at them. We're just gonna focus on contrast. So by clicking here, we will see that it is given us a number, and this number means that there's enough contrast between those two colors. So there's 4.72 to 1 contrast between the orange and the black, which means this is great. This can be easily read by everyone, and this presents high contrast. Stark is just one of the plugins that I use. If you go to Figma community, you can see that there are going to be a lot of accessibility plugins, such as A11Y Color Contrast Checker, AZ Comprehensive Accessibility Tools, or many others. There are also plugins available for Illustrator and Photoshop. You just need to do a quick search. Any plugin will work. It's all the same. It doesn't really matter. There's also this website. There are many websites, actually, where you can just select the color code and add it here, and then it's going to give you the contrast ratio. And this is great if you're not using Figma or Illustrator or any kind of software that allows for you to text inside the software. You can just come here and text the contrast between the colors. I'm gonna go to this illustration here. This is an illustration from the obvious.cc Instagram. It's the Brazilian company focused on well-being and mental health. I just took this from their Instagram, and I color picked the colors already. So when we select this, we can see that there's 2.12 to 1 contrast ratio. This is very low. This doesn't pass any of the contrast rules, and there needs to be adjustments made to these colors in order for this to be read. When we have such low contrast ratio, it can be very hard for colorblind users to understand what's in the image, or even for people with some kinds of visual impairments to be able to read what's on the image. So we need to make sure this contrast is higher. To do that, we can just change our color. So I just made some adjustments to this shade of orange, but you could adjust the shade of pink, or you could just change this altogether. But I just made some adjustments here, and by making the shade a bit darker, we can see that it's already achieving enough contrast to pass the WCAG color criteria. So we need to kind of balance the aesthetics that we want for our illustrations with the color contrast that we need for them in order to find this middle space where it's going to look good, but also have enough contrast to be read by users. Let me go back to my presentation. We also have a second color contrast rule in WCAG, and that applies to large text. So if we're using text above 14 point bold or 18 point regular or more, bold or extra bold or anything like that. And also for graphics and interface elements. When we're designing apps or websites, we need to consider 3:1 contrast ratio for buttons, radio buttons, anything that's interactive, or anything that we want our users to be able to see and distinguish. It's the same for large text. So what this means in an interface, this is a print screen from the Headspace app. They use lots of illustrations on their apps and communications, and they have these very soft colors. So we have this button here. It's a green button in a white background with white text. And when we test the contrast between those two colors that I already color picked, we can see there's not enough contrast at all. So 2:1 contrast, this is very low. This means that a colorblind user probably is not going to be able to see that there's a button here, or they're not going to be able to read the text that is inside this button. And this can stop the user from making progress in your interface. If they can see buttons, if they can see interactive elements, this can be very dangerous. So we need to be aware of the contrast when we are working with text and any kind of interactive elements and illustrations as well. Even if we're not working with text, but if we want to make a subject pop against the background, we need to make sure the subject has enough color contrast with the background color. So just a recap, for small text, we need to have at least 4.5:1 contrast ratio, but for larger text and graphics and interface elements, we can have just 3:1 ratio, and that will be okay. Another very important aspect of accessibility in illustrations refers to cognitive load. Cognitive load refers to the mental effort or resources required to process and understand information. It plays a crucial role in various aspects of perception and comprehension, including visual design. One relevant framework in understanding cognitive load in relation to visual design is Gestalt psychology. Gestalt psychology focuses on how humans perceive and organize visual information. It explores how we naturally group elements into meaningful patterns and structures. This understanding can help us manage cognitive loads by leveraging principles such as figure ground perception. Figure ground perception is a fundamental principle in Gestalt psychology, and it states that we tend to distinguish objects or subjects from their backgrounds. So we have this very famous illusion here, where we have two very distinct shapes, and when we look at them, we can look at the background or foreground. It doesn't really make a difference here, and we can see both two faces or a cup. And this only happens because we have two very distinguished shapes with very with high color contrast between them. So this perception, this principle, states that we tend to distinguish objects or subjects from their backgrounds. So when we create clear contrast between the main subject and the background in an illustration, we reduce cognitive load by making it easier for viewers to perceive and focus on the primary element. This visual separation helps users quickly understand the intended message or story without being visually overwhelmed. So this is an example of an image with high cognitive load. This is an illustration by Paula Scher. It's from her collection of American maps. And when we look at this illustration, there are so many elements here that it's impossible to absorb everything that's happening at once. We might focus our attention into these yellow lines, or we might look at what is written in white. But we have this feeling that we're never going to be able to understand exactly everything that's happening on this picture. And this isn't to say that this is right or wrong. It was certainly her intention to design this illustration like this, and that's okay. But we need to consider that sometimes we need to convey very important information to the users. So if we are selling something, or if we are telling the user something that they really need to understand, we cannot have this lot of cognitive load, because users won't be able to understand what we're saying to them. In contrast, this is an image that has very low cognitive load. It is the famous Pink Floyd album illustration by George Hardy. And when we look at this, it's very clear what's happening in this picture. So we just have this triangle here, which is like a prism, and we have the lines here. So we just glance at it and we immediately understand what's going on. This is an image with low cognitive load because we don't really take any time to process what's happening here. We just look at it and then we are good to go. We've understood what's going on in this picture. But we can also kind of mix and match those two concepts. So this is an illustration from Stefan Sagmeister for Lou Reed's new album, not new album, Lou Reed's album, Set the Twilight Grilling. And we have two very distinct areas in this illustration. We have the face, and the face has some song lyrics written all over it, but we cannot really make what these lyrics are saying because they are very small. It's a very busy illustration. But at the same time, we also have this black area here with very few information, with white text against this very dark background. And we can see that when we look at this picture, our eyes are kind of drawn to this area where the relevant information for this album is displayed. So the artist, that is a new album, and the name of the album. So yes, there's a lot of cognitive load here, but this area makes it easier for us to understand what's going on in this picture. This is the same for this illustration from Cesar Berger, which is a Brazilian illustrator. We have this area of the image that has a lot of shapes and colors and stuff going on. But for the title of the magazine, this is a magazine cover. The title of the magazine is very clear. It's contrasting between against the background, so we can easily distinguish what's written here. We don't have trouble understanding what's happening. So we need to keep in mind that we have to avoid high cognitive load, especially in fast-paced environments. So when individuals are in a rush, so if we're talking about designing an illustration for an ad that's going to be on the street, individuals are in a rush, they are going through that ad very quickly. Their cognitive resources are already very limited and occupied with various stimulus and tasks. They are thinking about a lot of things. They won't have the time to process everything that's happening in a picture if it has high cognitive loads. It is also very bad for users with ADHD because individuals with ADHD often face challenges due to their limited attentional resources, making cognitive load a significant concern for them. So to support better attention and focus in individuals with ADHD, it is crucial to design materials with simplified visuals, clear organization, and visual clutter. So we need to make sure to design illustrations with low cognitive load to ensure effective communication. And of course, this is going to depend on what is being conveyed on this illustration. Sometimes we do want to design stuff with high cognitive load, such as Paula share. This isn't something to be read in a rush on the street. This is something to be admired and absorbed when you're at a gallery or looking at this picture. But if you're designing something, to sell an album or a magazine cover, we need to make sure that our users are going to be able to look at it and understand what we are presenting to them. When designing accessible illustrations, it is crucial to consider how text is applied. Busy backgrounds and illustrations can make it challenging to achieve sufficient contrast between the text color and multiple background color, which in turn hampers readability and comprehension of the text. So here are some effective strategies to address this issue. First of all, we can just protect the text area. So I took these images from Headspace's Instagram. And because Headspace uses very vivid colors, it might be hard for them to work and to make it work with text directly above these colors. So instead, what they do, they just add a background below the colors, a white background, and then they add the text with neutral or even, very lively colors. And this works because there's a lot of contrast between the color of the text they chose and the white background. So we can do that. Or we can also use a protection with a gradient and some opacity. This is from Duolingo's Instagram. And here we can see that they added a square here with a black gradient with just with low opacity here. And this isn't the most accessible solution, especially if this background were a lot busier, it would still be very hard to read this text. But because the background, it doesn't have a lot of information and we have this dark protection against the background, we can see that the text still pops up a bit. So we can try to do that and work with opacity and gradients to make text more readable. This is the same in user interfaces. So again, Headspace, they use a lot of illustrations on their apps as well, but they create this protection here. So the text is never directly above illustrations because, it will be very hard to balance contrast here. So instead, what they do, they just add some protection here, and then they can use any kind of text color they want. This is the same here, even though there's a bit of the illustration is, a bit above, below the text, we can still read it fairly well. We won't have trouble reading this text because this is in a separate space on the illustration. This is also something we can do if we know that we are going to need to add text to our illustrations. We can always consider leaving a designated space for the text. So this is a poster for a Japanese breakfast concert from Deb J.J. Lee. And we can see that on this area, it's just like, it looks a bit like the Sagmaster illustration, where we have an area with very high cognitive load. Many things are happening here. But then the space for the text is on a white background. It's very easy to read. So she separated this space because she knew there would be text here. This is the same for this poster for the movie Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, where we have this area, but we can see that the area that's supposed to have the text for the movie on is very clear. There's nothing happening here. So we can quickly read the text, and then we go and take a look at all the other elements in the illustration. Other thing that we can do is to position the text outside or around the illustration. So this is the famous Beetle Volkswagen ad for the 60s. And basically what they did with those ads, they just used an illustration or a picture of the car, and they just kind of worked with the text around it, creating kind of a frame of text around the illustration, which helps to give a lot of highlights to this image. So the illustration is very highlighted here, but then we don't have any trouble with the contrast of the text because it is on a separate space on the illustration. This is the same for this book cover by Paula Cruz, a Brazilian designer. This illustration has many visual elements. It would be hard to add a text to inside this illustration. So they decided to go with this black frame around the illustration, where they added the book cover, the book title, and the author, name of the author here with very contrasting colors. Additionally, it is essential to include alternative text for every image used in apps, websites, social networks, and emails. Alt text serves as a concise description of the illustration, which is read out loud by screen readers for visually impaired users. So adding alt text is vital, especially for images with informative content, as it enables visually impaired individuals to understand the meaning and context conveyed by the illustration. So this is an image I got from Twitter. Twitter has this nice feature where you can add alt text to everything you post there. This is an illustration by Rob Turpin, and he just posted, it's a work in progress, something that he's been sketching, but you can see that he added this alternative text by this icon here on the left side. And he just added a very simple image description. It's a digital sketch, a spaceship hangs in the sky. It doesn't need to be anything complex. It can be very simple, just a description of the image, but it's very important for people, blind people or visually impaired people, to know what is on the images. Other very important aspect of accessible text is the choice of typography. In order to make it accessible, it is very important that we pay attention to the readability of the font choice, and also design the text with enough size and adequate spacing between characters and words. So we need to consider the readability of the fonts. And this isn't a rule, this is more like a guide, but usually sans serif fonts works better for small text. So body text, captions, anything that's going to be very small on the illustration or on the web page, whatever. Usually it's better to go with sans serif fonts as it is a bit easier to read them. But if we want to use serif fonts, they are okay for bigger texts, as well as script fonts. So if we want to use serif fonts, we can do that for titles, headings, or just any kind of text that's going to be highlighted in our illustrations. And we also need to consider adequate spacing between both characters and lines to make sure that these elements are not blending within each other. And we also need to pay attention to the weights. So sometimes we want to use very light fonts with very light weight, like thin or light. But sometimes these fonts are very hard to read. So we need to make sure that they have enough color contrast, or if we can, ideally, it should be better to use just regular or a bold weight. This is a web page from Study Hall, which is a small design team. And they use this composition of using the script font and the sans serif font. And it is okay, we can read it. It's not a problem. But if we make this image smaller, we can begin to see that it's harder to read the typography that's in the script font. And this is also because of the color as well. But when we take a look between the script font and the sans serif font, we can see that this is so much easier to read. We don't need to squint our eyes to try and understand what's written here. This is the same thing in another website. So this is the portfolio of designer Corentin Bernardo, and he uses this very beautiful mix of typography, where the title is a huge title. So he's using this serif typography that has a high contrast between the shapes. So we can see, we have some very bold shapes here, but also some thin shapes. But for the smaller text, he's using a sans serif, a very simple font. And this is because he probably knew that it would be impossible to read this text if it was written in this typography, because the shapes would all blend with each other and it would be very hard to read. We can also consider subtitles if we want to go bold with a typography choice, or even if we want to design our own script typography, we can do that, but we need to add subtitles to make sure the user is going to understand what we meant by that typography. So this is Safari Riot's webpage, and they have this very bold choice of typography on their webpage. It took me a while to understand what was written here, but when I hovered the mouse on each one of the titles, they showed us some subtitles here. So now I can see that this should read artists and this should read depths. So once I read this, I could understand what was happening in the typography, but I think it was a nice touch that they added to make sure that users are going to understand what is written, even though they wanted to use like bold typography, very cool, different typography. This is the same thing Spotify did in their 2021 Wrapped, if I'm not mistaken, but they use the typography as illustrations where depending on how much you're listening to these genres, the typography would become very small, and it would be very hard to read this very condensed typography. So instead, they just added subtitles here to ensure that users are going to be able to read what they meant with the typography. In conclusion, accessibility is a very complex and intricate topic. The content covered in this lecture provides a brief introduction and offers tips on designing products and illustrations in a more accessible and inclusive manner. However, it is important to recognize that this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to accessibility in products and graphic design. If you are eager to delve deeper into the subject of accessibility, I will provide you with some valuable links to aid you in your journey. These resources will expand your understanding and help you explore various aspects of accessibility more comprehensively. Thank you for joining me today, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any further questions. See you!